Welcome to our explainer on the Dyatlov Pass incident. We're looking at a truly chilling story from February 1959. And it's one of those cases that sits right at this terrifying intersection of a natural disaster and a completely unsolved mystery. So let's just dive right into it.
Now, I want you to keep this massive paradox in the back of your mind as we go through this explainer. These folks, they weren't amateurs. They were highly trained engineers and university students. They knew exactly how to survive in extreme conditions. And yet, when their tent was finally discovered, investigators found it had been slashed open with a sharp blade. But, and here's the kicker, not from the outside. It was cut open from the inside. I mean, whoever was in that tent panicked so severely, so completely, that instead of just untying the door to get out, they violently slashed their way out into the pitch black.
And you have to understand the environment they were fleeing into. The temperature outside that slash tent was a deadly, freezing -30 degrees Celsius. But the footprints left in the snow, they revealed something completely irrational. These seasoned survivalists actually ran away from the only shelter they had, and they did it either completely barefoot or wearing just their socks. They willfully left their heavy winter gear behind and plunged straight into lethal sub-zero conditions. So to figure out how they ended up in this desperate state, we really need to go back to the beginning.
Let's rewind slightly. Back in January of 1959, a group of 10 people from the Ural Polytechnic Institute put together an expedition to trek across the Ural Mountains. They were led by a 23-year-old named Igor Dyatlov. Now, pretty early on, one member actually had to turn back because of a sudden illness, which left our core team of 9. Their ultimate goal was this challenging peak called Ortorton, but on February 1st, heavy snowfall and some really severe storms forced them off course. They lost their way and ended up pitching their tents at the base of a mountain named Holat Siakyo, which, ominously enough, in the language of the local indigenous Mansi tribe, translates directly to Dead Mountain.
The whole tragedy unfolded over an agonizing couple of weeks. So after pitching camp on February 1st, their plan was to return and send a telegram by February 12th just to, confirm they were safe. But the 12th came and went with absolute silence. As the days passed with zero news, panic obviously began to set in back home. Finally, on February 20th, a massive search and rescue operation was launched, involving both the military and local explorers. It took nearly a week of scouring this freezing, desolate wilderness before, on February 26th, investigators finally stumbled upon that slashed, abandoned tent on the slopes of Dead Mountain.
Following those frantic barefoot tracks leading down away from the tent, the search party made a really grim discovery. About 1.5 kilometers away, down the slope near this large tree, they found the first 2 bodies. And this detail right here brilliantly illustrates the sheer bizarre nature of this mystery. Despite the -30-degree weather, these 2 victims were found inexplicably stripped down to just their underwear. I mean, why on earth would people freezing to death take off their clothes? It was a horrifying scene for sure, but honestly, the mystery was only just getting started.
It actually took months for the snow to thaw enough for investigators to recover the rest of the bodies. And when they finally did, the forensic details absolutely horrified the world. The physical evidence completely defied logic. Some of the hikers had sustained these severe fractures to their skulls and chest bones, literally injuries you'd compare to a high-speed car crash, yet incredibly, there were zero external signs of any physical assault or impact. Even more disturbing, one young woman was found missing her tongue, her eyes, and her lips. And to top the whole thing off, investigators recorded traces of high radioactivity on the clothing of some of the victims.
Naturally, early theories started popping up, but they fell apart pretty quickly under scrutiny. An avalanche? Well, experts pointed out that the slope where the tent was pitched just wasn't steep enough for a massive conventional avalanche to happen. What about an attack by the local Mansi tribe? The physical evidence at the scene completely ruled that out too. There was absolutely no sign of a struggle, and more importantly, there wasn't a single other human footprint found anywhere in the snow.
So if it wasn't nature and it wasn't the locals, what else could it possibly be? Well, this brings us to a really highly debated theory: secret Soviet weapon testing. Were these 9 researchers just in the wrong place at the wrong time, maybe caught in the middle of a classified military missile or weapon test? People who back this theory point directly to 2 major pieces of evidence: that totally unexplained high radioactivity on the clothing and local reports of strange lights seen illuminating the sky on the exact night they died.
Another absolutely fascinating scientific hypothesis that's been proposed over the years is infrasound. So infrasound refers to these specific low-frequency sound waves generated by high winds interacting with the topography of the mountain. Now, while these waves are totally invisible and inaudible to human ears, they are actually known to trigger severe, unexplainable panic, nausea, and just intense psychological distress in people. Could the howling winds of Dyatlov Mountain have created this silent frequency that literally drove these rational, experienced experts completely mad with panic, forcing them to slash their tent and run?
For literally decades, this case just sat unsolved. But then, fast forward to 2021, and we get a major scientific turning point. A team of Swiss researchers decided to look at the Dyatlov Pass incident through a totally modern lens. Using advanced 3D computer modeling technology, they reconstructed the exact conditions, the topography, and the weather of that fateful night in 1959. Basically, they wanted to see if the initial dismissed theories could hold any water when you analyze them with cutting-edge physics. And what they found gave us a really compelling new answer.
These Swiss researchers concluded that it was actually something slightly different, a slab avalanche. Now, unlike a typical avalanche that gathers all this momentum rushing down a steep mountain, a slab avalanche happens when a relatively small but a highly dense and incredibly heavy layer of packed snow unexpectedly fractures and collapses straight down onto a surface. This sudden, crushing, localized weight perfectly accounts for how the hikers sustained such severe internal crushing injuries without having any external signs of a struggle or an impact.
Based on this modern modeling, we can actually piece together a really logical, though obviously tragic, sequence of their final hours. First, the hikers are sleeping when a dense slab avalanche unexpectedly just drops directly onto their tent. Second, this immense, sudden pressure crushes them in the dark, causing those horrific internal chest and skull fractures. Third, blind, gravely injured, and trapped under this snow-covered canvas, they violently slash their way out, escaping in a total panic into a -30-degree blizzard, leaving their boots behind. And finally, out in the open, freezing and terribly hurt, they slowly succumb one by one to hypothermia.
Now, it is a very scientifically grounded explanation, but, it doesn't explain everything. The 3D modeling beautifully explains the internal injuries, the crushed bones, and that frantic panic to escape the tent. But we are still left with the lingering shadow of this mystery. Because science has utterly failed to explain why there was high radioactivity on their clothing. It also offers absolutely zero explanation for the young woman missing her facial parts. The slab avalanche theory gives us a solid mechanism of injury, but it leaves the absolute most bizarre anomalies completely untouched.
And that brings us to the end of our explainer, leaving us with this chilling story suspended directly between grounded science and an unexplainable mystery. On one hand, we have modern computer models pointing to a tragic, freak act of nature. But on the other, we have radioactive clothing and missing body parts pointing to something way darker and much more complex. So I want to leave you with this question to ponder today. What do you think really happened to those 9 hikers on Dead Mountain? Was it simply a sudden, deadly slab avalanche? Or did they stumble into the middle of a secret Soviet experiment? Take these facts, weigh the evidence, and see where your own conclusions lead you. Thanks so much for learning with us today.